Right, I've got the recording button going. Good. Selena Griffin, hello. Hello, guys. Hello, everyone who's joined us. We're not formally started, but we're just making moves to starting.
What does that mean, making moves to starting? What does that mean?
It's a random nonsense that comes out my mouth much of the time.
Really with that feeling.
Just for those who are watching, there's a chat function. Feel free to comment on it. But there's also a Q&A. So if you've got a nice juicy question, please put it in the Q&A. I've already received a few, and we will. I will fit those in as and when we're chatting. But good. It's clicked around to 7 o'clock. So Simon, thank you very much for joining our bookshop in Tring.
Well, it's very kind of you to invite me.
Lovely.
Provide nibbles and warm wine.
Does today's book launch day for your paperback, is that kind of more of a muted affair compared to obviously the hardback launch?
Well, I guess it is. It's funny because the hardback launch is the first time it comes out and it's unleashed into the world. So that's when it gets reviewed. That's when you get nervous. But a lot of people wait for the paperback, because hardbacks are expensive. So it's a double whammy. So I think they're both very important. In a way, the hardback feels as though it's the big moment because you've written this story. Suddenly people are commenting on it and it's out there and people have an opinion. But the paperback is the time when most people get a chance to get their hands on it because it's only $7.99, so there you go.
It is. I've got both here. I actually read. Publisher sent me a hardback to read, so I wouldn't want to spoil an actual one of the paperback ones for our customers. But and how's World Book Day been for you? Was it purposeful to launch on World Book Day?
Honestly, not really. No, I don't. I've been. World Book Day is always a huge deal, and when the Itch books were out, it felt as though it was very much part of everything that I was doing because I spent 3 years going to schools, talking to students, top end primary, first couple of years of secondary, and World Book Day was a very big deal. Somehow, when you move into adult crime fiction with lots of swearing, World Book Day feels as though it's less part of your bag. But I got a fantastic tweet this afternoon from 2 young kids who had mocked up the cover of the book that I did with Mark Kermode called Movie Doctors. And these 2 boys, they were about sort of 10 and 8. One was Kermode and one was me. And it was, it was a really brilliantly constructed cover. And then it then hits you, go, oh no, actually, this is quite a big deal, and it's very important in people's lives. I think it's just when you've been writing adult fiction, you feel as though you're less connected with it, I guess.
Yeah, it's interesting. We were offered the 14 different versions of World Book Day books, probably, don't know, back in it must have been October time, I suspect, and I ordered the whole lot, and you get them in bags of 50. And you buy them as an independent, but all the independent bookshops have to buy them, and then they give them out as kind of lost leaders for free. Have you? I don't suppose you've been offered. It must be a wonderful thing to be asked to write a World Book Day. Obviously, it means coming up with a short story, and I've asked the same question to a few people in the last couple of weeks, and it really comes down to whether there's a good idea or not.
Oh no, absolutely. I mean, I have got quite a good idea, but the thing is, I haven't got the time. The answer is no, and the answer is my life is kind of exploding as it is. I have so little time to do anything. Well, with radio and writing, that the idea of writing a short story. I mean, I would love to be in a position to do it, and maybe I will at some stage because it's a darn good idea for a story. But then sometimes short stories become rather good longer stories. I mean, the first Itch book was going to be a short story. And then I just thought it had legs, so I kept on going. But the answer is I haven't been asked, and I would have had to say no anyway.
Yeah. So you've been writing. is it 10 years? Am I guessing that?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, about 10 years.
10, 12 years, yeah.
So when you went through your Radio 1 phase and your it was Radio 5, wasn't it, after that? Were you a big reader back then? Were you always considering to be an author even back then?
No. Everything that has happened, as far as the writing is concerned, has come as a result of being the afternoon presenter on 5 Live. So one of the things that we wanted to do on that show was to make books a very important part of it. And so Thursday afternoon, we would have 2 authors in every week. So I interviewed hundreds and hundreds of authors, and the whole world of publishing became part of my life at that point. But I never aspired to be a writer, not at any stage. And then my youngest, who was 10 at the time, which is how I can measure this thing easily, he came from school and he was only interested in science. He wasn't really interested in anything else, not sport, not music, just science. And I had just left 5 Live and was starting on Radio 2, so I had a lot of spare time because it's, like a part-time job anyway. And I thought I'd write a short story. That's the bit I can't quite work out why I actually thought I would write a short story, because I'd never done that before. But this was the time when the iPad was new, and I got one on the first day, being an Apple geek. And one of the first, in fact, I think the first app I downloaded was an interactive periodic table. And it's still extraordinary. And it did for the iPad, it was something that a computer couldn't do, a laptop couldn't do, because you touch the screen and you could get involved with it that way. And in reading about the periodic table, it used the phrase element hunter for someone who collected the periodic table. As you remember, Ben, there are 118 elements on the periodic table.
Yeah. Unlike your son, I was rubbish at science, but yeah.
Everything in the universe, everything, you and I, everything that we can see are made out of these 118 elements. Anyway, so I thought, well, if you're 10, what a great thing to be an element hunter. So I thought I'll do that. So I wrote this story about this teenager who was an element hunter. I didn't have an agent, didn't have a deal, a publisher, anything. Printed it off on my home computer, just around the corner here. Extra paper needed for the printer, handed it to my son, who took it away and read it, and he liked it. And so after that, I thought, well, maybe I can do something with it. Found an agent. The agent found the publisher, and we went from there. So the answer to your question is, I had no desire or thought to be a writer, but the process of writing the first Itch book was so intoxicating that I thought I need to carry on. And fortunately, the nice people at Penguin Random House Children's agreed.
How long was that first version of Itch you handed to your son? In tens of thousands of words, or?
Oh, it was 85,000, I think. It was
wow,
full length. Yeah, the idea of a short story quickly disappeared into a very long story. No, it was full length. I mean, it needed a lot of work, obviously, which is where the editor comes in. But for that moment, I was thinking, this is great. It was like the opposite of radio. Instead of radio is a very collaborative process. And writing is a very lonely process. Radio is a very instant process. Think of an idea, say it, do it. Writing takes forever. Publishing takes even longer than forever. So. Yeah,
no, I've noticed that it's a glacial speed industry, and I came to it only a year and a half ago, and I've noticed how slow things move. I mean, I had my first meeting about organising a book festival for November. I met them in March, and I said it was for November, and they thought I assumed the following year. I mean,
yeah.
I think you as a person, obviously, you're well known for your book podcasts and all things. So finding a book agent can't have been that difficult, really. I mean, I suspect you know all the right people already, or was that initial process quite difficult?
No, the first agent that it was sent to turned it down, and I was very disappointed, and I went for a cup of tea at Leon near Oxford Circus, And I sat there, and I remember almost every sip of this tea. And I thought, okay, I must be able to do something. And I thought, who do I know, or who have I interviewed? Ian Rankin. I'll ask him. So I messaged Ian Rankin and said, who should I ask? Who's a good agent? And he said, he messaged me a name. He said, try Sam Copeland. He's good at RCW. So I said, thanks very much. Sip of tea. Public message to Sam at RCW. Hi, can you follow me? So he follows me. I've written this book. I'd like to send it to you. Sip of tea. He says, fine, send it to me. I'll read it this weekend. So I entered Leon without an agent. I left Leon with an agent interested. And then he rang me that weekend, like a couple of days later, saying, but this is fantastic. So it went from there. Basically.
Brilliant. That's the moment you got that. I mean, for all the success you've had, you trying to branch into a whole new industry and to suddenly get that affirmation must have been wonderful.
Oh, well, what was fantastic was, I mean, obviously having a public profile is useful in that first step, in terms of getting you onto that first rung, getting a publisher and an agent interested. But as I think everyone listening knows, that matters not one jot at all when your target audience are 10, 11 and 12-year-olds who haven't got a clue who you are and don't care. So if I'd been writing a memoir or something to appeal to a grown-up audience, as I am doing now, then that would be something else. But I'm writing for 10, 11, 12-year-olds where being on the radio, on Radio 2, as I was at the time, counted for nothing. They didn't care. No. So it was useful to start with, but after that, if the book's no good, they're not going to be interested. So.
You were, I mean, to that age group, you were probably just a very recognizable jingle, I suspect, or
some of them listen when they got in the car, they recognized the jingle, or they recognized the name, or their parents or their teachers had said, oh, this guy does radio, So yeah, there was an element of that. But you have to remember, I'm talking to people who don't own a radio. 10, 11, 12-year-olds don't aspire to being on the radio. They don't aspire to owning a radio. It's not a part of their lives at all.
Well, certainly not now, but I would have thought, 10 years ago, slightly different. Do you think?
Oh, no, they were not interested in the radio at all. If they heard it, it was in the car with their parents.
Yeah. Okay. So we will get on to talking about Knife Edge, which I will say I thoroughly enjoyed.
Well, that's good.
That's handy when you're interviewing as well, Simon Mayo, about it. But you obviously have to interview a lot of people. You have to read a lot of books. What would be your reading of choice if you didn't have to do it for a part of your living?
This is the point where everyone is now scrutinizing the shelves over my shoulder. What is it that he's put there?
French dictionary.
Which is revealing. So if I take that away, Simon Sharma, I did politics and history at university, so I tend to lean towards politics and history. That's upside down. That's Johnny Walker's autobiography. That's Bob Harris's autobiography, also upside down for no apparent reason. The Over story I read last year, Richard Powers. There's John Peel, David Hepworth, D-Day. That's written by my brother, Jonathan. James Lee Burke. I haven't read his new book, but I love his work. It's just fantastic. All set either in Louisiana or Montana. I love that. Lee Child and Robert Harris. I mean, I would say those three there in terms of novels. Lee Child, obviously unsurpassable. Robert Harris, the best at writing historical fiction, and James Lee Burke writing adult detective stuff. So I think, although I genuinely didn't plan it, that's the Top of the Pops annual. It's a Radio 1 book. That's a Fab 208 book from 1972. So that's not a bad indication of the kind of thing that I would read out of choice.
That's it. I'm glad you could talk your way through your bookshelf. Many people have hired in or bought in their bookshelves, especially.
Yeah, no, absolutely not. I mean, these are all Paul Gambaccini there, Tim Winton. That's a terrific book. Lenny Henry, Bruce Springsteen, Born to Run. That's a signed copy. I'd just like to say that. So here we go. There you go. Thank you so much.
Oh man, look at that. That's a must be a rare item. We interviewed David Hepworth. Must be 8 weeks ago actually, and what I just felt like being in the company of a legend. He's such an experienced man.
Oh no, he's fantastic, and he described the track Born to Run as lightning in a bottle, which is still for me that, you know, 4 words, but you know, that's a perfect description of that song.
Fantastic. So let's talk Knife Edge. I really loved it. I mean, obviously, why is it taking you so long to get to do a thriller, which I think is, judging by what you've just told me about Lee Child and the others, clearly it's thrillers that really are your area you want to be in.
Well, now,
why has it taken you 10 years to get here?
Well, it hasn't, would be my answer. So I would say that when you walk into, I don't think I've been in the Tring in your bookshop, but whenever you go into a bookshop, it is helpfully chopped up into different sections. So that if you want books for under 5s, you know, 5 to 8, 8 to 11, teen fiction, crime fiction, autobiography, it needs to be divided up like that, just for the ease of shopping experience. So I did 3 itch books. I did a YA book called Blame. I then did a book called Mad Blood Stirring, which is historical fiction, and now Knife Edge. In my head, they're all thrillers, all of them. So I think I understand why they're divided up for your benefit and for readers' benefit and for shoppers' benefit. But in my head, I write thrillers. The Itch books are thrillers. Blame was a thriller. Mad Blood Stirring is a thriller. It's just set in 1815. So I would say I've done the same thing for all of the books, actually.
And are you in the adult sector now, here to stay, or will you dip back into?
I think it would make sense. Certainly, the next book is adult fiction. I still have thoughts about writing another Itch book. The TV series is on iPlayer. Series 2 has just been filmed in Australia. They might do a series 3. I quite like to do another Itch book. I've got an idea for a younger book. So I think it'll be where the story takes me. But I think for my publisher and for my editor, it would be wise if I just stuck with what I'm doing at the moment and did a grown-up thriller.
Yeah. Georgina Parks actually asks an interesting question. I couldn't ask it probably at any other time other than straight away. Uninformed observation. Simon's referenced only male authors that he admires. Is that a thing? Do men tend to gravitate to male authors? Is that a thing? I mean, there are some great female thriller writers, but and you're now going to pull out a load of female thrillers.
No, I'm now afflicted because of Georgina.
Oh, dear.
I can only say that
we've done plenty of female thriller writer interviews. I mean, Ellie Griffiths is it's quite a recent one. She was interviewed by Mark Billingham. Two wonderful thrillers.
I mean, out of shot, Annie McManus and Grace Dent. However, to Georgina,
she's happy.
You're absolutely
happy
right.
to be shouted down, by the way.
Well, I'm not shouting her down. I'm sort of guiltily agreeing with her that all the authors that I've just referenced are in fact male. So what can I say? That's just the way the shelves are genuinely not arranged, but it can't be a coincidence, can it?
No, absolutely. And I do. I will reference Lee Child. You very impressively get Lee Child a credit on the front of the hardback,
yes.
Which I don't know if it's on the paperback. Is it on the? Yes, it is on the paperback as well. That's an achievement. That's a credit to your writing.
I mean, the thing that, yeah, if you're going to write a thriller, if you had a quote from Lee Child, I think, I mean, if I'm looking to buy a book and I want to buy a thriller, if Lee Child says it's something, it's a bit like if you're buying a crime book, or you know, and it's about a new cop, and Michael Connelly has reviewed it well, it kind of matters. Mm-hmm. So I've interviewed Lee a number of times, and I was very nervous, to say the least, when this came out, and I knew that because we had the same publisher, that it was sent to him in the States, and he had joked the last time he was on my books podcast. He had joked that when it comes out, he should interview me. He should host the podcast and interview me. And I assumed that was just like a throwaway line, but actually it wasn't. And last year, when the book came out, that's exactly what happened. And he was slightly more difficult because he was in America, but he hosted the show and he interviewed me. And you know that imposter syndrome people talk about? Well, believe me, I had it in spades. Because I was thinking, this is ludicrous. I can't, why am I, this is utterly nuts. But he was very genuine, you know, in his praise, actually. And in the story, although it hadn't occurred to me at the time, there's a strong Coventry aspect to the story, and he grew up in Coventry, so he hooked into it for another reason. Yeah.
I mean, that was one of my points, actually. Coventry is not your usual destination for a book, you know. It's not got the grit of, say, a London or a Glasgow. Why Coventry?
A point that was put to me very early on in the story by my illustrious agent, who said, why Coventry? And the answer is difficult to explain without doing a significant reveal, but there was an image that occurred to me in this very early on in the formation of the story, which I worked towards. And it's an image that can only happen in Coventry Cathedral, which is where I got my degree. So I went to Warwick University, and at the time, all the degree ceremonies were in Coventry Cathedral, which is a very striking modern cathedral, as most people watching will know. And there was a particular set of images which came to me, and I thought, okay, I'm going to work towards that. And I also quite like the idea of setting a finale in a large. This is a little bit Dan Brown, I suppose, but in that kind of grand, stately building, something like a cathedral appealed to me. So without anyone's permission, that's exactly what happened.
That was the first thought to the book. Was that the first thought to the book, or was it already an idea before that?
Right. I mean, I would like to have a very elaborate and beautiful story to tell you, but the honest truth is that, you know, some books come from very tiny ideas, and the tiniest of ideas is this one, which is that it came really out of a misprint. A typo, really. I was trying to type in a document the letters CNN, as in the American broadcaster. But instead it came out in large letters. I was using a large font, CNX. And when I saw CNX, I thought, oh, that's quite a good title. And then I wrote underneath it, when television goes wrong. I had no idea what the story was, but I thought that sounds quite appealing, to write about a broadcaster where something terrible has happened and what the aftermath was. So in the process of the discussion with my editor, it became what Knife Edge is, which is a British, I was going to say news agency, but people might think of a news agent on the corner, but like Reuters or Bloomberg. So one of those internationally recognized organizations that are responsible for dispensing news all over. So that's where the story of Knife Edge came from. And that's where Famie, who's my main character, that's where she works. She works at this news agency that I've set up.
Yeah, and she has a particular role, and much of that I didn't understand the roles of what they do within a news agency, but she sort of sits there in the middle and sort of directs where the news is going and whatever.
Yeah. So her job is referred to as slot, which is in a radio television context like the news editor. So she's in charge of the UK division, So, and slot really exists as a position at Reuters, and you sit at the desk and everyone else is sitting in front of you, and it's your job to kind of taste the news. So a news story will come in and you have to kind of go, is this significant? Is this important? If it is, then I can put it on the wire and I can give it our stamp of authority. So she is slot. She has these other reporters who are working for her. And on the first page of the book, there are 7 murders. And when she gets to work, it's very much a breaking news day as news of these murders come in one rush hour, all in London. And she then realizes as the first pictures come in that she knows who these 7 people are. And in fact, they sit next to her. They're the investigation team of the news agency. So she decides to go to all 7 funerals. And at the end of the 7th funeral, she comes back to her car, and under the windscreen wiper, there is a note. It's a typewritten note, like from an old-fashioned typewriter with indents into the page. And it says, "You don't need a weatherman to know which way the wind blows." Now, she is not old enough to instantly recognize that as a Bob Dylan lyric, but she quickly finds out that that's what it is. And she starts receiving other messages via bizarre, old-fashioned circumstances, like personal ads in the paper. And she then she doesn't know whether she's being targeted. She doesn't know whether someone is trying to help her. So she's trying to work out what happened to her 7 colleagues and who it is who's trying to get the messages to her. And that's basically where we spend the time.
It's there's a number of different directions I could take this interview at this point. The one that it probably starts me off is a busy newsroom. Have you got experience of that yourself through your career, or is that something you had to sort of somehow get kind of an understanding of somehow?
No, particularly the first sort of 100 pages, where she is working for the news agency. When I was at 5 Live, you worked out of the newsroom there, so there were desks that were arranged in parallel, and each row of desks was breakfast, and then the morning show, and then lunchtime and afternoons, and so on. And around you, the journalists who worked for BBC News 24, they were all milling and circling and so on. So the place was awash with journalists and journalism. And when there was a big breaking story, it got pretty manic. But it's what the journalists kind of lived for. It was the excitement and thrill of the story. And there were a number of those which happened when I was on. I mean, 9/11 happened. I'd been doing the show about 5 months. My show was 1 till 4. So the first plane hit on 9/11 at 1:45. So we told the story, and that kind of sense of what happens when big news breaks, how a story is verified, how you tell a story, who contributes to that story. Obviously, this is different because it's not radio or television, it's a news agency. But that sense of not panic, but controlled excitement, I think, was informed a lot of the first few chapters of Knife Edge.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the other elements to reading, as you're reading it, I'm aware that you wrote it in a very different period of the world, and suddenly you're reading about a busy newsroom. You're reading about people in a tube, and people all crushed together, and it's amazing how over 12 months our minds have shifted to the idea. And you even watch things on the telly where you think, "Oh, they shouldn't have filmed that," But I mean, isn't that just a peculiarity of how life has changed?
Well, even the cover, even the cover of the book, people will look at that and go, "You're standing too close." Why are you so close to each other? I think it's a real challenge to write about real life, and same with film, same with television drama. What is real life? If you're setting a book now, I know a number of people who've cheated by just saying, okay, well, the story is set in 2005, so therefore you can just do it normally. My current dilemma is I'm writing a new thriller, and there are, how do people travel? Do you go on a bus? Do you go on a train? What's it like for schools? What's it like for offices? I mean, it's a genuine challenge. So what I've done is I have made certain assumptions about vaccination and vaccination take-up. I've also sort of cheated slightly by setting it a couple of years in the future, and assuming that life has gone back to normal, because you're absolutely right. There are scenes all the way through the book, either on public transport or in Coventry Cathedral or a crowded newsroom, where everyone's instinctive reaction is, that wouldn't, that's not safe. So I'm kind of hoping that either people read it and go, it's all right, this is in another time or a parallel universe, or if people buy it now, they'll think it's okay, we'll be back at that world very soon.
It's a time that I know we all long for. Once again, I think it's one of those things. And I mean, I'm in my head, because one of the other things I'm known for is organising. I organise a comedy festival. I've been doing that for over a decade now, and it's all about timing. When can we open up? When can we go that next step? Because I know that the next book, the first book events where we can have it physically, will also be offering a hybrid, a virtual kind of stream of it as well. So I think that there are things we've gained as well. But it's all about. I want to be there at the start of the positive shift.
Yeah, and while it's great that we're doing this, and it's great that people can still talk about books and still buy books, what I really want to do is to be in bookshops. What I really want to do is to be at the festivals, talking to readers. I loved sitting at a table, but doing a talk, doing a Q&A, sitting at a table, line of people, having a chat. So that's not going to happen anytime soon. That is, meeting people from around the world who want to come along and have a photograph taken. I think we'll get there, but it's not happening imminently, is it? But I hope it's going to be back soon.
Ditto. So we've got a few questions. Let's knock a few of these. Shirley, how easy do you find it to write female characters? That's obviously reference to Famie, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, that's very interesting. And the answer to that is, I was hoping that you'd pick that question, because I really like writing female characters, and I pay particular attention to it. And originally, so there are two main protagonists in this story. One is female, one is male. The original version was that the journalist was going to be male, and the other person, who I can't really talk about because it's a reveal, was female. My agent said, I kind of read that before. Why don't you change it? And I did. And from that moment, everything fell into place. So Famie being a female journalist was exactly the right thing to do. Plus, journalism is full of brilliant women journalists, and I worked with lots. And in fact, the character of Famie is based on someone, very loosely, based on someone who I work with, who's an assistant editor on my program. It's a woman called Nita Mann, who sadly died a few years ago. And she would find it hilarious that I'm even talking about her, or even that I remember her, because we didn't get on particularly. But some of the characteristics of Famie are sort of inspired by working with Nita. She was difficult, arch, funny, brilliant at what she did. And that was the character that I wanted Famie to be. But to answer, who is it?
Oh, I filed it now. Sorry.
You filed it. Is it Caroline? I think it was Caroline. In the Itch books, Itch is a 14-year-old boy and a 15-year-old boy in the third book, but he only survives because of his sister and his cousin, and his sister, obviously a girl, and his cousin, who's Jacqueline, and so it's a triumvirate. Blame was basically set around a teenage girl who's in prison, who's called Ant. Mad Blood Stirring was set in a men's prison, so that was slightly different. But yes, I think I make a deliberate effort to write strong women characters just as a way of, just because it feels like the right thing to do. So I don't know why, but once I'd started writing Famie, she seemed like the only person who could lead the story. And I also think, which is getting into a slightly different territory, but I don't agree with people whose basic instinct is stay in your lane, author, write about what you know, write about your own experiences. I have found that to be completely untrue. I write about what interests me, and the subjects that I've written about are what interests me. I haven't written about anything that I know instinctively. I've never written about radio. I've never written about music, although music and radio are kind of tangentially involved. So I write about what interests me, and I check these characters out. I want, if you're writing about a 40-year-old woman journalist, that has to work. You have to read that and think, yes, I believe in that. Mad Blood Stirring was set in the 19th century, set in the 1815 prison in Dartmoor prison. The main prison that I wrote about was full of black prisoners. Really, are you doing that anyway? So I write about the characters that interest me, and hopefully the stories work from there.
Well, I was unrelieved at that, because a big part of the book is about terrorism, and so you obviously don't know a lot about terrorism. So
if I did, I wouldn't be telling you.
What was your thought process? Because you do get into it quite deeply. You clearly have to base some of that on evidence.
The terrorist side of this story, because obviously when the 7 attacks happen all within half an hour of each other, that's clearly going to be an organized terrorist group. It came out of a conversation that I had with Gordon Carrera, who was the BBC security correspondent. And we were talking about terrorism, and obviously there is big scale, internationally organized terror groups. But he said the most difficult forms of terror to fight are the people who go off the radar completely, small groups. And he gave me a number of examples. And so the terror group that I write about have no website. They don't have laptops, they don't have phones. They believe passionately in their cause, but I thought it would be interesting to write about terrorism from that point of view. It's very low rent, but that makes it even more scary, I think.
Let's look at another question. Simon Watson, what drives you? Radio, podcast, writing. How do you manage it all? I totally agree with that question. You're a busy man. When do you write?
Well, I mean, that's a very good question. I try and honestly, I don't know what the answer is to that question. I get up in the morning. One of the reasons that I'm looking forward to doing Drive Time again on Greatest Hits Radio, which starts on Monday week, is that the construction of the day, which I had for a number of years, excuse me, talking too much, which was to be on the radio at the end of the day, was that I found that I could write in the morning and then do the radio in the afternoon. And that was very productive and creative for me. So I found as though I could compartmentalize things. So I could get up, and I wake up pretty early most days. So I could be writing by 5:30, 6 o'clock. I've done 2 or 3 hours of that, and then I can sort of start switching into other things, answering phone calls and getting ready for the show. So I'm a little bit behind on my current book, but hopefully I'll be able to pick up speed in a moment. But organizing things, it does make my head explode a little bit, but I just do it. Also, playing music is a part-time job, so it enables me to do something else in those available hours. It's not a proper job. None of them are a proper job. It's not like teaching, where it just obsesses you and it takes up every second of your day. So the question is, what drives you? I don't know. I'm doing the things that I enjoy. I enjoy being on the radio, and I love writing stories. And if I didn't enjoy them, I would stop. So I'm really only doing the things. This makes me sound very kind of hedonistic, doesn't it? But anyway, I'm only doing the things that I enjoy. Sometimes I say yes to too many things, but in general, I'm doing the things that I like.
Many have referenced that of me, though. I mean, I've made a living out of the things I enjoy, organizing comedy festivals and running a bookshop, and what have you. So it's the way to exist, and more people should do it. Margaret just put a little comment in the chat thing, which I had a note all about Sophie Christopher. Over the last year or so, I've got to know the Trans World team very well, actually, and I've got a lot of respect for that, the publishers.
Yeah.
And clearly, I don't know who Sophie Christopher was. She predated me, but would you be kind enough to say a few words about it?
Sure. The book is dedicated to Sophie. She was an extraordinary character at Transworld. She was one of those people that lit up a room, basically. She organized the press, she organized the tours. If in an ordinary world, if we were coming to your bookshop and arranging this as an event and everyone watching this was actually in the bookshop and we were having nibbles and warm white wine, Sophie would have organized the whole thing. And she died, I think it was a brain embolism, just like that. And she hadn't made 30 and she was engaged, she was getting married. And everyone at Transworld, in fact, everyone in publishing was devastated because she was such an extraordinary character. She was just one of those larger than life characters. Like I said, she'd light up a room. So when she died, and also in the early state, when we were promoting Mad Blood Stirring, I'd written the first section of Knife Edge, and I read her some of it, and in the opening section, which is where the 7 murders happen, because of events that were happening elsewhere at Radio 2, all the people that were murdered bore an uncanny resemblance to the people who were causing me grief, which she thought was very entertaining. So we had a laugh about it. Obviously, that's changed, and that's not the way the book is at the moment. So, so I just thought that it would be a nice thing to just dedicate the book to her memory, really.
Absolutely, her name has cropped up in a couple of books actually, and it was so I'm glad Margaret brought it up. Let's have a look at a couple of other questions. Patrick Harty, and I don't get this, who is topping up Simon's glass of white Burgundy?
Sadly, nobody is. It's actually come to an end, and I'm now contemplating how I'm going to survive without it. There were some people around the corner, but
isn't there anyone you can yell at?
I'm afraid there isn't. I'm going to have to cope without the white Burgundy.
Well, I mean, that's how much gin and tonic I've got left. So I'm
I mean, if you give me 15 seconds, I can get it.
Maybe we have an agreed pause where the entire audience go off for a drink, and we come. No, we'll carry on.
I can cope without it.
We've got what, 19 minutes, so don't worry. Shirley Everell, how do you approach writing a new book? Are you a plotter or do you make it up as you go along? And keep in mind, I've asked that question of a number of people, and I'm always astonished at some of the most amazing authors who just wing it, and Anne Cleves is a classic case.
Yeah,
she has no idea where the story's going any more than the person reading it.
Lee Child is another one who just starts, And Ian Rankin says, when he's writing his books, he doesn't know who did it either, And for me, I find that an incomprehensible way to write. And the key thing is, I remember talking about this a lot when I was doing the school visits. There is no correct way of writing a book. The only thing that matters is, does it come off the page? And if what works for you is winging it, then go ahead and wing it. However, I am not like other authors where they know in chapter 21 who's going to be saying what to whom. So I'm kind of a hybrid, Ben. I think that's what I'd say, that I know where the book is going to finish, and I know the key points that are going to happen, but there's quite a lot of meandering that happens along the way. The most plotted I've ever done is Mad Blood Stirring, which, because it was based on historical events, it ends with a massacre of April 1815. That's a bit of a spoiler if you're reading it at the moment. So it had to tie to that. So it's about the first Black Shakespeare production in Britain, which took place in prison 4 of Dartmoor Prison in 1814. So what I thought I'd do is I'd run the tragedy of Romeo and Juliet up with the tragedy of what happened in April 1815. So it was also arranged like Romeo and Juliet. So I wrote it in 5 acts, and it has a similar story arc to Romeo and Juliet. So that was absolutely plotted, not chapter by chapter, but certainly section by section, act by act. But half of the delight I find is in is when there's some spontaneity and where it's allowed to breathe. So for example, in Knife Edge, Famie is the main character. She has a daughter who's at university called Charlie, who I think is 20, if I remember rightly. And Charlie was always going to be quite a small character. But the first time Charlie arrives, which is in the first third of the book, suddenly the scene, I'm thinking, oh, this is good. There's a dynamic in the scene which wasn't there before. And every time Charlie turns up, the scene is better. So there's obviously something about the structure and the dynamic that you set up that makes it like that. So I don't want to tie things down completely. So I knew that Knife Edge was going to finish where it does in Coventry Cathedral, but I didn't know everything that was going to happen between then and now, because otherwise you lose that spontaneity. And that's always quite thrilling when you suddenly realize that a character who was going to be back here is demanding to be brought here. You're thinking, okay, well, I'm going to listen to that.
Yeah. And how much involvement was the editor in this? And I interviewed Frances Quinn the other day about The Smallest Man. And her editor cut out 30,000 words, which that must be heartbreaking. She had to rewrite, probably a third of the book, maybe probably not half the book, but a third of the book. So how involved is the editor in your process? I mean, I suppose let's add to the fact that your chapters are so small, and I love that. They're so short. I mean, that's to my detriment, because you always end up reading that much more.
Nicely, that's precisely right. Because I'd been reading some books that are arranged like that, and everybody does it. I'll just read to the next paragraph break, or I'll just read to the next chapter. And if the chapter's short, you go on, and it was deliberately arranged like that. It also sort of fell naturally that it kind of broke up like that. So yes, that was a deliberate attempt. But as far that was, so the editor didn't come up with that, but the editor shapes and corrects and informs and tells you that a scene doesn't work. I mean, the most obvious example, again, just to go back to Mad Blood, when I first talked to my editor, is a very esteemed editor called Bill Scott Carr, and I'm sure he's not going to be watching this because he'll have better things to do. But when we were talking about Mad Blood in the very early stages, I told him about what happened in Dartmoor prison, and he was very interested and so on. And he said 2 thoughts. And bear in mind, at this point, he hadn't read anything. I just told him the story. He said 2 thoughts. 1, it sounds a bit nice. 2, tell me about the agent's wife. So the agent is the prison governor. So the prison governor was a factual person, as indeed was his wife. And he said, bring her forward. So that was his instinct, and his instinct was completely correct on both. So it becomes less nice at that point. I had always planned to put a smallpox outbreak in there anyway, because that's what happened in 1813, I think. But Elizabeth Shortland, who is the wife of the prison governor, is one of the central point of view characters in Mad Blood. And she gives a completely different perspective on this all-male story. So when you get an editor who's that intuitive, I think it's enormously helpful.
I'm often massively impressed by anybody who's made a career or as an editor. I mean, what skills must they show at the start of their career to be given that much trust that you're guiding authors as to whether something's good or bad? It's a very hard thing to do, I suspect. But
I have absolutely no idea. But they're all crazy obsessive.
Selena Griffin, do you have any idea who would play Famie if a film was made? So you said who Famie is based on. Is there somebody, should it become a film or a TV adaptation?
I mean, the rights have been bought. I mean, I'm not very good at this casting game, but I would think someone like Gemma Arterton would be great, Kerry Mulligan, she'd be great too. So someone like that who is a forceful, dynamic, slightly scary presence. And if you've seen Kerry Mulligan's new film, Promising Young Woman, then you'll know exactly what I mean. Anyway, so I would think someone like that. I think, yeah.
Yeah. There was something. I mean, you pulled on it previously that you were broadcasting at the time of 9/11, and I mean, I found your writing of both terrorist I say both terrorist of the terrorist attacks within the book is done so beautifully, and you create such amazing tension. And is there anything from having experienced it when you were broadcasting during 9/11 where, you know, that must have been the most extraordinary environment to be on air?
Well, yes. I mean, it certainly was, and it is a day. It's certainly a day no one forgets. Being on air telling the story was something I'll never forget. It was my daughter's 8th birthday, and
Wow.
so we told that story. I came up there at 4, drove home, and it was my daughter's 8th birthday party. Well, hey, so and also, I mean, people will remember this. If your birthday was the 11th of September, you kind of moved it to the 12th or the 10th, you know, just because nobody wanted to have a party on the day itself. I mean, it certainly had a profound influence on everything that we did on the radio, and in fact, probably got a lot to do with a lot of the politics, international politics, that happened ever since. As far as the events described in the book are concerned, I don't think so. I mean, I don't think so. I think because the terror that I'm describing here is not international, not really. It's low key and domestic, which is, I think, what makes it more scary. So I think it's just, you know, I think 9/11 was one type of experience, which is the way we now think of when we try to define what terrorism is. But I think everyone else's experience on the last couple of years is that people realize that one guy in a truck can be a terrorist. 2 guys with knives going into a newspaper, that's a terrorist incident. So, and far more difficult to guard against. So I think it's more influenced by the attack on Charlie Hebdo, for example, in France. I think it's more influenced by that than anything else.
Yeah. Nick Stewart, very deep question. Aaron Sorkin said in June 2016, good writers borrow from other writers, great writers steal from them outright. Do you agree?
Well, that's Colonel Nick Stewart. Hello, Colonel. How are you? Wow, to be even considered in the same breadth as those people. I mean, Aaron Sorkin, his scripts for the movies are, you know, if everyone else's scripts are like that, and Aaron Sorkin's script is, you know, is just absolutely huge. I would say that they are a profound influence on what you do, speaking personally. I mean, I think that I write with they're not just short paragraphs, short chapters. I have always admired Lee Child's brevity, and so I would say that there are influences from other writers. How did Nick express the question? You probably ditched the question again.
I have ditched the question. I can't remember. Sorry.
I mean, if it's about, sorry, Nick, I should concentrate more. But if it's about the influence of the authors, I think if you don't learn from people who are better than you, then you might as well stop. Yeah. And I often read, I mean, I mentioned Rankin and people like Lee Child and Michael Connelly, and think, wow, you know, that's fantastic work. I really like the way they handled the tension in that scene. And there's one of Lee's books where there's a bad character doing bad things, but he's just referred to as the American, because his identity is a mystery. And I think when I'm writing about one of the characters in Knife Edge, he's just referred to as the student before we learn who he is. So I can, sometimes you pick up on strands and ideas and inspiration. Same is true on the radio. You know, I hope I'm a better radio presenter now than I was 5 years ago, because you hear people doing it better than you.
Yeah.
So,
Nick's put it back on, but I think we've answered the question. Now, Maria Gammon sent an email. She sent 2 lengthy questions. I'll ask her a second one. In Books of the Year podcast, Simon mentioned the original title of the book, but didn't want to say at the time what it was. Would he be willing to tell us whether that title was the one used in the end, or if not, what was the title, the working title of the book?
Oh, for Knife Edge. I mean, I always have so many different titles for my books, and in the discussions that took place, my titles were always too fancy or too clever. They might have references to Bob Dylan or other song titles, and the opinion from the publishers was very clearly, this has to say thriller. There can be no doubt, particularly as your last book was historical fiction, there can be no doubt that this is a thriller. So the combination of that kind of cover, and it's called Knife Edge, there is no doubt that that's going to be a thriller. I would have to scroll through my files to come up with some of the earlier titles, but
it's certainly not going to be romantic fiction, that's for sure.
No, I mean, there's a great Dylan song called "It's Not Dark Yet," which is, and I think "Not Dark Yet" was one of the working titles. And they were going, yeah, can't. What is that? People might think that's literary fiction. We don't want that. We want this to be a thriller. So it was quite an education. And Knife Edge is certainly was going to be a thriller.
One of the particular points that I was struck at the time was how impressive our character, and I won't say his name, how his music knowledge for what a 20-year-old, I think he was, coming up with the Bob Dylan Subterranean Homesick Blues as a kind of a clue.
Yeah. I think a close reading of the text will reveal his father was a Dylan fan.
Yeah, okay, all right. You are forgiven. That's a TV. We asked that question. Rowena, your books are available as audiobooks. Do you choose the narrator or have a say in that choice? I was wondering whether or not you actually do the narration yourself, but
well, that was suggested for the Itch books. That was suggested, but I believe in employing and using experts wherever possible, and my range of accents, I'm afraid, is not good enough. I can do well, when I used to read to my kids when they wanted a bedtime story, my accents were either posh, camp, Cockney, or Cornish, and they're the only voices that I can do. So I thought, no, I'd rather leave this to the professionals. But what happens is you get asked for, a wish list, and then that gets, and then you don't get them. No, I think, again, you use people who are specialists and people who know, because there's a particular art in reading an audiobook. And so Mad Blood was fantastic. The Knife Edge audiobook is terrific, and you're just looking for the right tone, the right, the ability to do a number of voices, and I'm delighted that she's enjoyed the audiobook. But again, I don't think it would be for me to choose the person, because the experts will know better than me.
Yes, we've got 2 minutes left, so let's get one quick question in. Let's talk about the BBC. Georgina Parks, that's the last question to go in. During the time working with the BBC, you've had to tread carefully around political events such as referenda and elections. So does being an author potentially give you the freedom to find your political voice, if you want one?
I mean, yes and no. So I still work for the BBC, because I still do the film show, and I've done that for a long time. So a degree of overt political bias, I don't think would be helpful. Also, it's not really necessary. I want, for the radio programs that I do and for the books that I write, to be read and listened to by everybody. And they're not polemics, but hopefully they're thrilling and exciting stories. So certainly, you might have some values that come through in the dialogue and in the construction of the plot and in the way the characters work that plot through. But I think an overt opinion from me about the referendum or who should win the next election, I don't think it's needed, and I don't think it's helpful particularly. But if you hang around afterwards and you get me another Adnams White Burgundy, I might tell you in about an hour's time.
Yeah, good. So we're clicking through to 8 o'clock. What's the next book, and when's that next book out?
It's funny you should say that, because that's what my editor was saying to me merely days ago as we had a catch up. So all I will say is the next book is due next year, okay, and at some stage, and it's sort of about tinnitus.
Tinnitus.
Yes. That's the starting point.
Long book or?
For this book, I'm one of the many people who has tinnitus, and I'm determined to make it pay. So, yes,
whatever.
That's the starting point for the book. So I'm writing about that, but hopefully it's a thriller, and it's certainly a grown-up thriller, and it should be with you next year, I think.
Fantastic. So I'm going to say a few thank yous. Firstly, thank you to Simon Mayo. Thank you to everyone who has joined us. Thank you for all the questions, and to your publishers. Our next adult event is Erica Waller and Sarah Manning next Thursday evening. That's the book launch, actually. And then we're doing Abigail Dean, Girl A. Have you interviewed Abigail?
Yes, I have. In fact, I'm doing it again for the Books podcast on Monday. I think I'm doing another interview with her.
Brilliant. Well, we're interviewing her on the 13th, which is the Saturday. And actually, unlike what I said with my previous crowd, that's going to be our April book of the month. You are aware your book is our book of the month for March.
I do know that, and I'm very excited. Aren't I doing something with you?
Yeah, well, the plan is, and we've obviously got to work around your schedule, but you're going to join our book club meeting for half an hour. But I mean, basically what I'll do is I'll give you a designated time. You tell me if you can make it, and we'll flex it around your timings, really.
So when you spend 2 years working on a book, you might as well go out there and tell everybody about it. So, I'm having it here for the next couple of hours if you want.
The beauty of that is we're allowed spoilers because everyone will have read it. Obviously, we've had to tiptoe around a little bit tonight, but we can really get into the nitty gritty. And usually, it's the first Monday of the new month. So, but we'll flex that around. That's actually Easter Monday. Whether you're free or not, we'll work that out. But listen, thank you all, and not for repeating myself with lots of thank yous. And we'll see you all again next time. Thank you.
Thank you for listening.
Cheers, Ed.